A Passion for Mushrooms by Chrononautical. Chapter 4. A Feast Fit for a Kingdom. The Great Hall of Erebor had been one of the places in the mountain large enough to fit the vast girth of Smaug easily, and so the evil worm had not damaged it overmuch. Even so, it was one of the first halls Thorin had ordered restored wholly to its original splendor. He wanted it lined with roaring happy fires, full of ale and cheer, and as always, the king under the mountain simply hammered away until he got what he wanted. The repairs to the stonework had been done before Thorin himself was healed enough from his injuries to stand, and they had been done well. The vaulted marble ceiling made the room seem too grand for a hobbit to stop long in, but the smooth granite tables were actually quite comfortable. It was a hall for feasting, and it pleased Bilbo to know and to see used as such. The first great gathering he had seen in that hall had been the Victory Feast, one massive celebration for all those who had survived the Battle of Five Armies. On that day, thousands of dwarves crowded around the tables, most wounded, but all in high spirits, rebuilding their strength before going home to the Iron Hills. Around those tables, too, had been the men and women of Dale, feasting and carousing in joyful fellowship, gladly restoring the old alliance between the city and the mountain. There had even been a small party of elves, including Captain Tariel, who stayed to show hope of renewing the friendship between Mirkwood and Erebor, though Thorin allowed them in the mountain only that once. That had been a day of plenty, with an ocean of ale to wash away the memory of hardship, and bellies full enough to sink the soldiers back to earth. Since then, there was always something to eat in Thorin's hall. Through the long winter, as dwarven refugees returned home, and the trade caravans of men or elves came with supplies, leaving with more gold than such things would have been worth in any other time and place, there was always food on those tables. Thorin did not forget the many years his people had been hungry. If it was often only porridge, only stew with thick grainy bread, only a few fish out of the long lake, it was always there, and free for the taking. No dwarf in Erebor would ever go hungry while Thorin was king. Still, as any hobbit knew, there was a big difference between not being hungry and being happily full. Bilbo was quite pleased that one of his last acts in Erebor would be to make it snow food and rain drink on those tables in a way that would be the envy of all Hobbiton if his neighbors had any idea. It was fortunate that he'd planned the meal with that goal in mind, for when he arrived in the hall, he saw that the entire mountain seemed to have turned up in anticipation of the feast. On a typical evening, of no special import, there were usually only 100 dwarves around the tables closest to the king's seat. Apparently, the story of Bilbo's mushrooms had grown in the telling, for the great hall was nearly half full. It was not so bad as feeding 2 armies, but Bilbo had not planned for it. Frantically, he started doing the math. Dwarves loved meat, and so he had intended for everyone to have a whole chicken. Spring chickens were tender but small. Now each diner would be lucky to get a quarter of a bird. Of course, there was venison to be had, and enough fish for each dwarf to have a good portion in both sauces, but it would not be the same. The stew was plentiful enough. Indeed, between the stew and the potatoes, there was more than enough for every person to fill their stomach, but that was not a feast. That was not special enough for his last meal at Thorin's table. Bilbo's panicked calculations were suddenly interrupted by something hard striking his middle and his feet lifting from the marble floor. "Hey!" The objection was pointless, as Keeley continued to spin Bilbo around like a small child on the dance floor. "Best of hobbits! Oh, Bilbo, how can I ever thank you?" asked the prince, setting his friend back down and grinning from ear to ear. "Thank me? You haven't even tasted the food yet. Anyway, you provided the venison." "Yes," Keeley laughed, "and perhaps you think you are being subtle, but Feely told me the whole story. Because of you, Tariel dines in the mountain tonight at the head table, no less." "I'm fairly certain your uncle said the 2 of you weren't allowed to sit together." "Well, no." Keely's smile didn't dim even a little. "It was only a first step, but it is a step taken when for months I have believed my journey impossible. Of course, Uncle will deny you nothing when you are only days away from leaving with Gandalf. That you should come forward to help us, though, when you have so many troubles of your own. Oh, Bilbo!" Bilbo didn't know how to say that he had not been looking to forward the cause of young and forbidden love so much as prove that elves like mushrooms. But fortunately, he was at that moment interrupted. "Master Baggins does not often think of his own troubles when he sees another in need of aid," Bard said warmly. "Lord! I mean, your highness, thank you for coming. It is always bad to you, Bilbo, and I shall always come when my friends ask for me, even if it is your fault that I am now King of Dale, and so must spend my days with ledgers and lawyers instead of at some honest toil. Laughing, Bilbo said, "It is no one's fault but your own, if your people see your worth." Then he greeted each of Bart's children with a friendly hug and shook Taviel happily by the hand. Finally he came to Gandalf, last among the small cluster of big people. "Well, my friend, is it true?" the wizard asked. "An entire acre of black trilbies." "More, Gandalf!" Bilbo's mind immediately snapped back to the importance of the evening. "Almost an acre and a half!"
"Whoever heard of such a thing? I'll wager you did not think to find so much wealth in all of Erebor."
Bilbo peered suspiciously up at the old man, but other than a merry twinkle in his eye, there was no indication that he was mocking the hobbit. "At least you know how well they are. I trust you will be on my side in this." Gandalf smiled.
"And how precisely do you think I should support you?"
"Why, you must tell him, of course. You must tell Thorin how very much the trilbies are worth. For you know how dwarves are. If it is not some shiny metal or a bit of pretty stone, they will refuse to believe it has value."
"Just as hobbits refuse to respect any traditions but their own," Dwalin said, coming up behind Bilbo. "Still I will see you sit before my king enters his hall."
Rolling his eyes, Bilbo skipped over to his little chair next to Thorin's great seat. At least he would have Bard on his left if he needed someone friendly to speak with. The head table was quite cleverly designed with stone blocks that could be removed from the floor to fit taller chairs where necessary, so Bilbo and Bard could sit side by side without Bilbo's feet swinging or Bard hunching to eat with his plate on his knees. From the other tables in the hall, they would appear to be of a height, if not precisely the same size. It was a comfort when Bilbo sorely needed one, for just then Thorin entered the hall in full state. Balin, Feely, and Gloin were with him, all of them dressed in their finest jewels, and their arrival marked the start of the feast. With a dry mouth, Bilbo looked around at the rest of the company, seated as they were, at the high table. All of them wore gold and silks decorated with precious stones. Even Bolfer, who so often preferred a warm-knit cap to finery, had a mithril chain braided through his hair. They looked every inch the rich dwarven lords that the quest had made them, and Bilbo had never felt so out of place in their company. He was quite certain that they knew something of what would happen after dinner, something that he did not. He was nearly positive that they had gone to such efforts with their appearance for his sake, perhaps because they knew, as he did, that this would likely be the last meal they all shared together. Piling meat, potatoes, and mushrooms on his plate, Bilbo tried to ignore the leaden weight in his stomach. Of course, the food was very good, and it did look beautiful on the golden plates that were used for the high table. Morosely, Bilbo refilled his stew bowl from one of the bejeweled tureens and wished he was sitting on Thorin's other side so that he could better hear the joke Gloin was telling.
"You are not keeping up your end of the bargain, Master Baggins,"
Thorin observed, frowning at his own plate.
"You are meant to tell me about the dishes."
"Well," Bilbo said, anxiety making him a bit rude, "the dishes are made of gold, and I believe they were crafted in your grandfather's time. They were certainly part of Smaug's hoard, but we've washed them since." Thorin snorted, and Bilbo almost thought he saw the king's lips twitch in a fraction of a smile.
"The soup is delicious, though I cannot discern the meat you use."
"There is no meat. It's a mushroom stew. The flavor comes entirely from the black trilbies." The king gave a thoughtful hum, and Bilbo ticked off a point in his own favor, especially when Thorin used a dinner roll to sop the last taste of broth from his bowl.
"I think I recognize the taste now in this gelatin on the lake fish,"
he said, tasting a small forkful carefully.
"though I do not see any mushrooms."
"No, the perch is a recipe I made often in the Shire. You only need one trilby to come up with enough sauce for several fish, as long as it's a big fat one, of course. The trick is to cook the fish in the sauce, but then rest it out of the pan while you use a bit of cornstarch to thicken the sauce into a glaze. Brushing it over the fish keeps them warm and moist while giving them that lovely shine."
"Yes, it looks well on the plate."
Thorin took another bite and chewed it carefully. "Though, of course, all that really matters is how it tastes," Bilbo said nervously. "That's the benefit of the black trilby. Just one mushroom is enough seasoning to make fish for an entire dinner party."
It tastes delicate,"
Stomach plummeting to the soles of his feet, Bilbo stammered an apology, trying to salvage the situation. He knew how Thorin felt about delicate things. I'm sorry your judiciousness does not like it, but please don't make up your mind just yet, your gloriousness. Try the trout, it's much better. You'll like the brown sauce, I know you will. Much more flavorful. Or the venison, you'll like venison, your stateliness.
I did not say I do not like it,
Thorin said with gruff politeness. No matter, there are plenty of other dishes for your majesty to try. In answer, Thorin shoved the entire perch into his mouth, chewing it voraciously. A little of the sauce flecked his beard, but there was far less mess than Bilbo might have expected from such a maneuver.
I like it,
the king said after he swallowed some, but not all, of the food in his mouth. Then he washed it down with a swig of ale, looking angry. At a bit of a loss, Bilbo focused on his own food for a minute to hide his confusion. He would not like for Thorin to be kind during the meal and then decide against the mushrooms because he did not care for the food, but he also didn't think Thorin would lie. Moreover, he could not understand why Thorin was so forceful. It wasn't as though the king cared what Bilbo thought. He was saved from having to broach the silence by another soft hum from Thorin.
It may be said perhaps that I like this more.
Looking up, Bilbo saw the king take a second large bite of his trout.
Huh? I mean no insult to your craft, no disparagement of your skill, but when things are more settled and I can dine as I choose without being a poor example to my people, I shall not eat fish for a year. Yet still I would eat this.
It's the trilbies, of course, Bilbo said, giddy with relief. Don't they make a nice rich sauce?
Indeed, though I am sure the product has more to do with a clever, capable chef, rather than the rarity of his ingredients.
Taking a long pull of his own ale, Bilbo did not panic or lose heart. There were still half a dozen dishes left for Thorin to taste. One of them would convince the king to spare those mushrooms.